And I'm going to shut my video down too. So hello everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Amanda Cox with North Carolina Youth Rugby Union, and today is Indigenous Peoples Day, so I just wanted to give a nod to that. In case you didn't know, North Carolina exists on the traditional territory of 8 indigenous tribes. North Carolina is also home to more than 122,000 Native Americans. And today we take this day to celebrate everything that they've contributed to our culture, education, and communities. So thanks y'all for being here. And I just want to say all human rights work is essential as we move forward as a country. So today, North Carolina Youth Rugby Union would like to welcome Derek Lipscomb to discuss race and racism in rugby with us. So you might have seen Derek around the pitch playing for Old Blue, Rooney, or Roots. And also with us tonight is Stephen Lewis, the current GM of Rugby United New York. So thanks to you both for being here tonight. And I will be quiet now and let you take it, Derek. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Amanda. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for being able to join us today. As you were talking about the Indigenous Peoples Day, smack dab in the morning, maybe about 6:30 a.m., I get a link about our current administration's statement about Indigenous Peoples Day, and it's more almost like a reclamation of Columbus Day. And so I just find that interesting. It's just a noticing, really, but it is one where, as somebody that does have to teach and has to keep a very close eye on what our current administration is doing and what's happening around our students, it's something where I recognize that, like, without fail, we're already most likely going to have a quick chat about that tomorrow morning. So with that, I can move straight into it. I hope you guys are all doing well amidst everything else. I know this month has already felt like a year within itself, just given the past couple of weeks, but we're almost there towards being able to vote and hopefully get this passed and behind us. But at the same time, we know that there's going to be plenty of work to do regardless of what happens. So with that, I'll move in. My name's Derek Lipscomb. I am the founder of The Work, which is largely what informs a lot of what I'm going to be doing with you guys, you guys today. But I'm also a co-founder of Roots, which I'll get a chance to talk about later. As well. And so with that, we'll be talking about race and racism in rugby and really trying to make sure that we're grounding the conversation on those two things as we kind of move forward. I know some of you guys might also be in spaces where you guys might either have started to practice, or you're thinking about it, or you might have already just kind of cut it in terms of just wanting to pick up in the spring. But regardless, there's going to be a space for you to really kind of reckon with what to do next, especially just given everything that's taken place over the summer, and get you guys in a space where you guys are already thinking about what to do next and feeling supported in that too. So, excuse me, before I move forward, I always think it's important to just kind of think about where you might be on our compass. And this is the Courageous Conversations, like, compass that kind of grounds ourselves. So in terms of just, for example, if you're in the intellectual or thinking space, regardless of what has happened today, you might be in the thinking space and wanting to get a little bit more stats. So you might be coming into this meeting hoping that, there's a little bit more data driven of a conversation. For some of you guys, you might be in the social space, so the doing. So that's actually with like hands and feet. So I'm actually showing more so how I'm feeling these days and feeling like, I need to roll my sleeves up and kind of get involved in these racial conversations a little bit more. So thinking more active based. You might be in the feeling space. So somebody that might be emotional. So for example, me reading that message this morning from our current administration about how it's actually supposed to be Columbus Day. And there's even a space, even if you guys haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, but there is a space that says, it's either you support America and, go along the lines of supporting Columbus Day, or you're in this radical activist space where, all of a sudden Indigenous Peoples Day is being seen as something that is reductionist or revisionist, and being able to think about the feelings that come with that, being being told that this is how I should actually be right now, because I think this way. But there also might be the believing space, the moral space that, you just have a gut feeling about things. You can't necessarily voice those things or show those things, but you know that there's something happening that's going on with you right now. And so it's just important to be able to touch base, especially as we have this conversation, but then even for your future conversations. So what happens past this moment, and being able to think about where you're impacted. Hopefully at some point throughout this entire presentation today, you would have moved into all four of them. That means that, you're just actively thinking about all the different ways that you can kind of put your powers to use, and being able to recognize that, there's a lot that's kind of going into this. And so hopefully, we'll be in the space of doing all four of these things at some point over the next hour or so. So, excuse me. Again, to ground this conversation, I think this is coming off the heels of, what a lot of clubs have already been doing, but I do think that this has been quite a momentous moment for rugby in general here in America, as as USA Rugby has decided to come out in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm sure all of you guys to some degree may have been in one of these spaces as they made that statement. But one of the things that I want to make sure that we understand is that the comments that show up under that is something that is always going to be visible, right? And so being able to understand that if you've read something, and for some of those comments, and I really should have put up an example of them, but for sake of anonymity, but then also to make sure that we're just focused on, what we can do going forward, I felt it necessary to just say, like, Dave came out with a statement. There were some that were for, there were some that were against. But the fact is that is very visible. And so for the number of you guys that are in control of, whether it be high school groups or, even middle school groups, or you have your hand in some of the clubs that are around, your impact is going to be felt. So your moves to some degree are being watched. And I think after this past summer, there are a lot of players, there are a lot of coaches, administrators, fans, different supporters that are all taking a close eye at their respective clubs. And so sometimes that's a great thing. Sometimes that can be something that brings on anxiety. And, just given that this has, very large racial implications in it, obviously you want to get this right. And so the biggest part is just making sure that, communication is going to be a big part of it, but also, again, grounding yourself in how you kind of feel about, USA Rugby coming out with a statement like this and what it's going to do to impact your particular club. Excuse me. So for us, I think there are just 5 big objectives here. Really just kind of examining your role, whether you be a coach or an administrator or both, but then also explaining how that power dynamic kind of comes into play. Because you guys are in control of a team, what does that mean for, the players should they come to you, if you notice something, all with respect to race, right? And so being able to understand that if you're going to be in the space of helping these people or helping these students, putting yourself in that moment and being able to actually say, am I prepared to be able to do this? Do I have the toolkit that's needed? And if not, that's okay, but understanding what do I need to do next to make sure that I'm giving myself the best chance, but then also my players, fans, adults, for some of you guys that have parents that are heavily involved, like how do I kind of manage that? But then recognizing too that there's a culture on the team. You as the coach can cultivate it, right? The players build it, but you as the coach or administrator can really kind of cultivate it and make sure that it's going in a space that remains inclusive, that remains to be positive, but then also is open enough to be able to address some of those powerful conversations that you might need to have with respect to race. But then also thinking about action steps, right? Like I can't get up here and tell you guys about what it looks like and then not actually be able to help you out here. I want to be able to make sure that you guys are in a space where you feel like you've got some things in your toolkit to where you can walk away with feeling positive and knowing that you can support your players as well. And so with that also means doing some work off the field. So when I say the work, I refer to diversity work largely, but even more expansive than that, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Understanding that diversity. So having the players of color is not enough, but rather how are we being equitable in this space? How are we being inclusive in this space? And making sure that, if I've got any player really, regardless of background, that they're actually being able to see themselves with the team and actually being able to work with the team. And so those things can be kind of hard sometimes, but it does stem again from that power, but then also just being able to understand that there's a communication piece that you are going to have to slide yourself into more so. Excuse me. So who am I? I grew up in Cincinnati. I was born in Virginia, actually, so not too far away from you guys. I was born in Norfolk, and eventually moved over to Cincinnati and grew up there. I went to Columbia and graduated in 2011, and then continued my master's, got my master's over in London at the University College London Institute of Education. And so I've played with a number of different teams. I would spend too much time talking about them, but the bigger ones that, have made a large impact on my life are, Columbia, where I went to college, Old Blue, where I currently play now, Blackheath, who I played for when I was over in London, getting my master's, playing with Rooney as well. So once they started up, getting a chance to get a contract on with them, and then USA 7. So I played as a Falcon back in 2014 to 2016. And so it's been great to just be able to see rugby in all these different capacities, but it also, as somebody that is Black and male, going through these spaces, what does that mean when, for example, I'm on Columbia's rugby team and I'm the only Black person, or when I get to Old Blue, I am the only Black person, or even more so going to Blackheath and I'm the only American at the time. And so being able to think about it through that lens, and then understanding too that, once I played for USA or Rooney, how my race kind of impacts those conversations coming into it, what I see on the outside, what I can bring into the space without feeling like, I'm doing too much, or, I'm putting our team in a very precarious position. And so with these types of thoughts, I ended up talking a little bit more about it with a few friends. And so we ended up founding Roots Rugby back in 2019, even though those discussions have been going on since about 2011. And so those were conversations that were largely born out of understanding that there is a perspective when you are the only minority on a team, regardless if you're Black, regardless if you're white, Asian, what have you, being a minority in that space can be very real. And so how can we kind of bring that, those stories together, but then also kind of begin to push for a more equitable team? And so Roots Rugby was largely formed to give more Afrocentric players a chance to play at a high level. Oftentimes, just from my experience coming through, you either played flanker, center, or wing as a Black male. And so rotating between those three positions, I recognized that playing wing actually fit me the most. And so what I also noticed is that whenever we would play away, play games, there'd be another Black person on the team, and they would happen to play my position. And so as you go on and you kind of get better and better, you recognize that, you're playing against this Black player, you play against this Black player, and before you know it, you've managed to become one of the better wings in the area. But at the same time, like, all of the Black players that you've played against haven't made it. And so with Roots, the hope is that we can actually spread it out, give players a different look. If they wanted to say play, fly half, or say if they wanted to play locker, or even inside, outside center, what have you, fullback, being able to play that position, but on a higher level. So you don't have to spend so much time trying to work out the kinks, but rather, here's your shot. We're about to go play in Vegas, and you want to play this position, here you go. We're about to play some of the best teams in the nation. And so, you can really give yourself a chance to kind of see where you're at in that. But then also Roots wants to be a resource. So, if we notice that their kicking was off, being able to reach out and find kicking coaches or finding the resources needed to be able to help that player play to the best of their ability. So I can talk about that a little bit more as we talk about doing the work, but excuse me. Also to understand that I'm an educator and administrator for a school here in New York City called Buckley. We are a K through 9 school, so we don't go into high school. However, one of the things that we've recognized is that our history curriculum needed a lot of work over the past few years. And so one of the things that I've been doing with them is revamping our history curriculum, but then also giving a closer look to our DEI curriculum and our initiatives there. And so I'm in charge of our curriculum from K to 6, and I help out in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade with another teacher as well. But basically what that does is give me a complete overview of what it looks like for a child developing now, and being able to talk about race and including those social events and current events that are happening around us now, being able to use that to inform it. And so funny enough, our current administration does not want me doing this work, at least federally, as they see it as being too divisive. And so I want to be able to use this time today to make sure that you guys understand that it is not divisive, but it is going to be a vulnerable space. And so, whether or not you are going to be talking out some things here, but eventually you'll be in a space where you're really thinking about, what do I know, what should I know, and kind of how can I use what I know already. And so with that comes a lot of just discussions around race, comes a lot of discussions around gender, but the biggest thing is understanding that we want to be able to build here. And so that leads me into the final piece, that I am the founder of the work Racial Literacy. It is, I can put I'll put the link in the chat eventually, but it is it's an educational resource. It's free. It is for anybody that is looking to get involved even more so in the discussions around race. There are plenty of resources for teachers. There are also things there for parents, but I would recommend taking a look at it just for your own growth and understanding where you can kind of build off of there. But then making sure that you understand that it's not something where you need to be, an absolute beginner at. You can be somebody like myself. I've been researching, just race and racism in general for the past 10 years. And so this is something that I'm used to, but if this is something that is very new for you, it can be a very taxing and tiring experience. So, with that, being able to go through this process with somebody you trust is also very useful. Excuse me. So our opening question, and I want us to be able to just think about this for, just a few minutes, is, say you guys have returned to play. This might be, in the next few weeks. This could be even in the spring, what have you. But you guys are starting to return, get out there, play again. COVID is a thing of the past now. We've moved past it in some way, somehow. But a player comes to you, and let's say regardless of race, a player comes to you and wants to be able to kneel before the next game, right? So they might have seen something that has happened on, the news channels or something, or they've read about it, but they've come to you as one of your players and said, hey, I want to take a knee at this next game. And so, there are a lot of different questions that you might be having. There may have been answers that you may have already given, right? So there may have been a space where you would have just said, nope, and just say that's then and there. Like, we've cut it out. Like, we're not even going to think about it, but thinking about the impact of what that might mean. So your next move is going to be a very crucial one. And so that's where, I want us to be able to think about it a little bit more. And so, excuse me, we'll do that going through some of our objectives as well. And so you as a coach or administrator had this player come to you and tell you that this is something that they're looking to do. And being able to understand that this is a very pivotal moment for them, but it's also going to be a pivotal moment for you too, right? Your moves, or what you decide to go with, is going to make a very large ripple in your community as well as the team. And so in order to make sure that you have these things in mind, it's important to constantly kind of circulate between like, what are you okay with versus what the team is okay with, and being able to understand that that's not going to be something you can guess at. You have to talk about that. And so you want to make sure that you're communicating like, hey, so it's come to my attention that there's a player or players that might want to engage in something like activism, and using our team as a platform to do it. Right. And so being able to just start with that and having the larger conversation at hand, right, is going to be able to help you kind of get a barometer of where your team is, but then also understanding where your influence is too. Right. And so for some of these teams, you guys might have an athletic director, you might have a board. Right. And so it's important to be able to understand where that relationship is. So if you have your board or your athletic director and they're using you as an intermediary to kind of understand what's going on at the team level, again, that's where you have to come back to communicate. You do not want to guess in these situations, right? And so being able to have a very clear, streamlined line of communication there is going to help you, bounds, leaps and bounds. And so just being able to say what you think your team can do in this capacity is very important for your board. It's important for your teams, like fans and supporters, but then also as some of you guys that coach high schools, the parents are going to have to be a part of that conversation too. And so excuse me, it all depends on how open you are with this. And so, for us, one of the things that we've already been talking about at Old Blue, for example, is if we want to do this is what we could do. These are the things that we could do off the field. So even more so that, let's say if we decided we're not going to kneel for this week, but here's some things that we're going to be able to do to engage our community, to engage our fans and our supporters. These are things that we have to talk about, at our advisory level or administrative level, however we see fit, but we have to talk about it. We can't just leave it up to whoever's in charge, i.e. our coach, and be able to make a decision for us. Because the summer has taught us that players do have a voice and they're discovering that voice. And so, excuse me, as I said, your role is going to expand. Right. And so now you guys are going to be in a space where you're going to be seen wanting to make sure that the players that you have on your team are educated in general. Right. And so that means that we are not moving into a space where, you could be willfully ignorant now. Now it is going to be about making sure that you know what's going on and how it impacts your players. And that goes top down. Right. And so it does not make any sense for our players to know everything that's going on, but our board or our athletic director or our coaches don't know anything what's taking place. So for example, with this Indigenous Peoples Day thing, one of the things that I have to do as an educator is making sure is that when I walk back into this classroom tomorrow morning and somebody, just because without fail it's going to happen, one of my students yells at like, well, now it's Columbus Day now, what was the big deal? Being able to make sure that I can now work with the classroom, but then even that person, to make sure that they're feeling like they're heard, because there might be some pieces that I might need to unpack there, but then understand that like there's a chemistry within my classroom that I must maintain. And so in order for me as, a rugby team captain or coach to make sure that I'm keeping that chemistry together, we have to talk about it. And so sometimes we don't want to discuss race because it makes us feel a little bit awkward, but this is the best time, better time than any, to discuss how you're feeling, where you would kind of see like your team going in a year's time even, or even just 6 weeks, and being able to talk about that a little bit more too. Excuse me. So with that means making sure that you understand what's at stake when we talk about our culture. Right. And so just like I said before, you may have already made a decision, right, in terms of saying to that player that wants to take a knee, nope, you're all going to stand, put your hand on your heart, and you're going to scream the Pledge of Allegiance, or you're going to sing the Star Spangled Banner like nobody's business. And understand that while your intention there may have been just like, look, we're all on the same team. We want to be able to work at this together. Yes, there are some issues and we can talk about them, but this might not be the time. While that might be your intention in your purest of purest hearts, the impact is one that will be seen as negative, right? That you've just decided to, instead of being able to hear that player out or to hear those players out, and being able to understand that this is something that impacts them very like real, right? They might be in the feeling space of that compass, right? Understanding that that is something that we want to be able to encapsulate. We want to be able to capture that and use that. That is something that helps us with the culture. So understanding that these people have a voice on this team, right? Or this person has a voice on this team. And it's the same as everybody else's. And so understanding that that should be able to inform that one of our players or a handful of our players might be feeling this. Or on the flip side, it might be the majority of the players that want to be able to take a knee. And there might be a player there that might feel that I don't want to do it. I don't, for my own reasons, I don't want to take a knee, right? But understanding that the only way that we're going to be able to have that conversation is to actually have that conversation. And so some things that help kind of lead that conversation along is your own mission statement, right? And so if you don't have a mission statement, sometimes this is a great time to bring the team together, or at least your team leaders, and start to be able to think about like what that might look like. And so that in itself can kind of give you an idea of your values, right? And so understanding that like, it might mean that like, you know, we want this team to be somebody that is seen in the community as somebody that is impactful, or we want to be able to do something with our platform to be able to show others, maybe they're our smaller, our middle school team or elementary school rugby team that looks up to us, that this is kind of what we do too, right? And so making sure that you can kind of keep those things all in your wheelhouse, and it doesn't feel like, you know, if I decide to take a knee, now all of a sudden this is something that we've never done before, and now I'm the one that has to speak about it. But rather, if you've already talked about it and you have that clear understanding going into it, should half the team decide to take a knee or the other half decide to stand, or you have some type of other way of kind of going about it that kind of shows that there's unity, but there's also an acknowledgement there. You have a group of players that can discuss these things, right? And so oftentimes when talking about race, and then, you know, even for some of you guys, you may have had a conversation about race or about kneeling in the past, and it may not have been, you know, the ideal like outcome that you would have probably look for now, right? And so understanding that there can be guilt that comes with this. However, that is not an action step, right? And so you can feel guilty that there are things that are happening or there are current events that are going on right now that make you feel some kind of way. But feeling the guilt is part of the process, but it is not something that pushes you in the direction of creating an action step. In fact, it can actually paralyze you because you won't want to do anything, because sometimes to acknowledge the guilt even is a hard part. And so making sure that you understand that, yes, you can feel, right? But what is that going to mean towards actually moving towards something that you want to be able to do for your team, for you and your team? And so it's important for you first to kind of build a toolkit for yourself before we talk to our players or our students, however we kind of see them, but making sure that you understand that I'm not going to be able to lead you as a player if I myself don't have the proper things to be able to do it. And so that toolkit might mean that you get a chance to kind of talk to somebody that you trust. It might mean that, like, you know, for example, it might be you researching or you sitting down and really having to go through a number of resources to really kind of read up on this. Having some conversations with people that you generally don't have conversations with, or leaning into the discomfort and reaching out to players that you feel like they should be able to give you an honest look at what you've been able to accomplish thus far, but making sure to kind of weave in race into it. And so thinking about, like, you know, we usually don't talk about race, but part of that means that there are some things that are being left unsaid. And how can I as a coach and you as a player be able to reach one another to where we can have these conversations a little bit more often, but they don't feel as if, you know, it's a mountain to climb. And so again, that might mean that you have to revisit some values conversations. Again, if you have your team, sometimes it might be great to go off of what the school already might have. So if you guys are attached to a high school, being able to think about, you know, what does their language look like in terms of inclusivity, but then also making sure that, you know, you have your own identity too within that. Rugby teams are vastly different than some of the other teams that might play under the same school, as I'm finding out as well. And so, excuse me. And sometimes it's just great to kind of work with that and build a cohort. And so, you have your leadership, like whether it be your captains or, if you have like, your team's leadership, whether it be a couple of captains or you have like some officers there or kids in different grade levels that might be able to oversee their respective grade level, whatever the case may be, you do have a hierarchy there that can really be able to help you inform what the next moves are. And so, sometimes it's great to kind of build a crew of advisees, if you will. So players that you kind of see as being able to give you an honest opinion, but then also somebody that reflects the team's values of that caliber. But then you as a coach might also have a cohort of whether it be colleagues at your job or other coaches that you see and chat with often, and don't have to feel like you're doing this by yourself is the biggest thing. And so making sure that, again, while it's important for you to kind of build this up for yourself, understanding that you don't have to do it by yourself. And so in order to make sure that everybody's being kept in that loop there, it's just important to make sure that you're communicating more and more often, especially as it has to do with race. Excuse me. And so, with that, I do think that it's important to understand that these are possible action steps, right? You guys might already have things that you're already thinking about, or you may have already started conversations elsewhere. But it's important to understand that there has to be something that you need to do as a coach now to be able to influence what these next steps look like, right? And so for me, for example, I understand that as a player, there's only so much I can do, right? I can have the conversations with my captain or with my coach, but there's only so much power I have in this kind of conversation. It really does depend on the coach's willingness to kind of bring that into the space, to have this open conversation. So it might just be, hey, we're going to have an administration meeting for our first practice, and it might just be us talking about some things and us kind of getting on the same rate or same base level and understand like, hey, we acknowledge what took place over the summer and we understand that there's going to be some slight changes here, but making sure that we're in a space to where we want to be able to talk about it. And so one of the things that I talked about with a coach here in New York was whether or not they could allow a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. And so understanding that that in itself might be seen as a political statement, but for Black folks, and I can tell you straight from camel's mouth right here, it's not a political statement. It's a humanitarian one. However, I know that, again, it invokes feelings, it invokes emotion. And so that's actually what you want in this situation. You want the emotion to be able to come in, to show up, because it's important to kind of understand that emotion, that peace, has been what players of color have been feeling all the entire year. From COVID dying unexpectedly, even to now, as we even have our current administration coming out and reclaiming this as Columbus Day and posing Indigenous Peoples Day as something that is seen as being radically activist. These things evoke feelings. And so understanding that we can't just shut up and play rugby, right, or shut up and just play, those things are going to show themselves up on the field or in the locker room. And you as a coach want that. You want to be able to kind of involve those feelings, because that's what it means to have a truly equitable and inclusive space, right? If I'm going to have this player of color on my team, I'm going to make sure that they are fully present at all times. So I'm not just bringing that player into this space just to be able to make sure that they can run 90 meters into a try, in for a try, but rather understanding that they might be going through it just as many other POCs are going through it. And I, as a coach, need to make sure that I'm touching base with that player, just because I think that's the right thing to do from a humanitarian standpoint. And so excuse me, that means that you as a coach can't take social media lightly. Some of you guys might have parents that you're friends with, or it might be people that reflect your current team. Some of you guys might even have players that are pretty vocal on social media, and making sure that you're aware of it at the very least. And so it doesn't mean that you need to go snooping, but this time as important as any, is if something that shows up that can be perceived as racist on somebody's social media, and then they come into practice with that, that could have some implications, right? And so understanding that players are seeing that as well, and they might notice that, like, so-and-so as a teammate, their parents have been like mouthing off on social media. And, a lot of it has been really disparaging to Black and brown people. Being able to understand that that's something that you as a coach might have a part in, and understanding that, it might be rooted in a values conversation. It might be rooted in a mission statement conversation. However, to ignore it is also making a statement, if that makes sense. So you not talking about it is talking about it. And players of color are also noticing these things too. And so, not, again, to put you in a position where you either do or you don't, but recognizing that, like, this is what it means to have that power, right? You have the ability to really influence the culture of your team. And so these things can really decimate a culture. And so understanding that if a player, especially players of color, if they want to be able to be seen or actually feeling a part of that team, that means that they don't need to substitute their voice for anything. They should be able to come talk to you, or talk to, some of their own teammates about what's affecting them, and they should be able to still walk onto that field feeling supported. And so that's something that Old Blue has had to do over these past few months, and really just kind of hammer down that, even though we want to be an extremely competitive team, we don't want to do so, dismissing players' concerns about, whether or not they're being seen when they put on the jersey. And so one of the things that we've decided to strike through in terms of, rhetoric, is the shut up and play type of disposition, that, you think about this on your own time, but when you're on the field, you only think about rugby, and understanding how that can impact a player in terms of being able to feel seen and feel like they're a true part of that team. And so you as a coach get a chance to be an educator. And so one of the things that I do when I train our faculty, for example, is that, you can be nonpartisan when you talk about these things. You can very much just kind of approach it in the manner of, like, this is what I believe to be right, but you cannot be neutral. And so it's important to kind of understand that nonpartisan does not mean neutral. Nobody's neutral in these spaces, right? There are biases that are at play at all times that do kind of lean you one way or another. And it's important to recognize those biases before coming into the conversation, but then also understanding that, like, the larger conversation here, the thing that I want my players to leave with, is that they have a voice, is that, we here at this team accept you in all of your different capacities and want you to be able to come together and play as much together as a team. And so it's important to kind of be able to scaffold that as the adult, most likely in the room, just given that, you're working with, a younger population. And so one of the things that I've recognized to be useful is just being able to read, recast, and resolve. And so you read a situation. So if I used, George Floyd, for example, you read the situation. There's been a man that has been kneeled on for close to 9 minutes, and he was killed on tape. Right. And so I, as the coach, may have seen that. I have to recognize that my players have most likely seen it, the real thing. Right. And understanding that, like, even as a player, to watch somebody die on video is going to be an experience. Right. And so reading that situation and understanding that there's no way that they're going to be neutral in that situation. They're going to have feelings, and to tell them that, throw those feelings to a side, let's focus on rugby, is not only just dismissive, but it can actually be rather dangerous, right? And so thinking that they're going to eventually find the answer somewhere, and so why not do it here in a space where we can really be able to have that conversation? And so that means that you're going to have to recast. So that means you're going to have to kind of dig into your toolbox here and kind of think, what do I need in this moment? What do I think they're going to need in this moment? And how can we kind of move forward, but we understanding that we have to talk about those things, right? And so that's where the resolve part comes in, and being able to understand that we need to have a conversation in order for us to move past. And so, for us, you might get out, you might be able to get back onto the rugby field, and then, there might be an unarmed person that's killed by the police again. And so what is that going to mean in terms of recasting and resolving? What do we know now, for example, that USA Rugby's come out in support of Black Lives Matter? What do we need to do to make sure that we kind of follow in those footsteps, and making sure that we are still well within what we need to be able to do to kind of come together and talk as much as possible. And so, excuse me, I want to make sure that you guys kind of see yourselves in those positions of being able to talk, but then also be in the space to be able to learn too. I think oftentimes as coaches, you want to be seen as being able to know absolutely everything, but with something like this is actually something where, you and the players, you and the parents, fans, supporters, what have you, might be able to go on this journey together. And so you don't want to be in a space where you think that you need to be able to save, that you need to be able to bring up from the depths or anything of that nature. All of those things will kind of lead you in this space where you will only be discouraging yourself, and you'll stress yourself out. We want to make sure that the coaches and the players have a relationship where one gets a chance to kind of inform the other. And so those roles might switch, but understanding that the biggest overall piece to take away there is that collaboration actually helps down the line, right? And it helps the team grow. It really truly helps that chemistry tenfold. And so you want to make sure that you might have a team full of players of color, but you're not going to be seen as I need to save them, but rather I need to be looking for ways to be able to help them, right? And so one of the quotes that I love so much, and I repeat it a lot to our teachers as well, is that if you are looking to help me because this is just something for you to do, I don't need it, right? I won't need the help. However, if your progress is tied to my progress and being able to understand what we need to do next, then that's when the most work can actually be done, right? So understanding that we both need to be working on something, and the best way we can be able to help each other is by talking to each other. Excuse me. And so I say that to really kind of wrap it up, but also to kind of give you guys a chance to think about being able to move into these next steps in these next few months, and understanding too that, once the election comes around, that's going to flip the script. Whatever we had planned, or whatever we thought was going to take place, we can expect that to be struck from the board almost immediately. And so being able to understand that there's going to be work that needs to be done, but there can be a way for you to do this ahead of time and being proactive, where your players are already looking forward to being able to come back into the space and really realizing, there are a lot of feelings and emotions that they want to talk about, rather than being reactive, where it's you kind of scrambling to kind of put Band-Aids over things because you didn't have the conversations first. And so, given that COVID has kind of shut us in a little bit, this is a great time to kind of just touch base, whether it be via email, or even just like, small like conversations here and there. If you see your players or your coaches, your other coaches or parents in any capacity, and kind of understanding that, there's something that needs to happen next, right? And some of you guys may have already started doing that something in terms of what it looks like off the field. So you guys may have already been doing a lot of social media outreach and touching base with people and kind of getting your thumb down on, what needs to happen next. But there might be some that might be in the space still of just thinking about what to do next, and knowing that there's something that needs to be done, but what does that thing look like? And so, excuse me, again, these are just some of the resources that I use. The work.education is one that has kind of helped me kind of solidify a lot of this work, and help me ground it. But then also with respect to me being, a rugby player myself, knowing that like there's a space that I as a player need to always be in, right? I need to be in that competitive space. I need to be able to work with my team, but then also understanding that my activist voice, my voice here as a Black player also needs to be supported too. And so knowing that if I'm going to play with the team, helping, like knowing and understanding that, you know, I'm somebody that does a great deal of research here, but I also want to make sure that, you know, I'm being seen in my full capacity and as to who I am. And so for more information on that, you guys can feel free to touch on rootsrugbyfamily.com. We do a lot of community organized type things, really given a chance to kind of work with a lot of different neighborhoods, but more so to give them a voice and understand that you know, you don't have to be just a rugby player, but rather you can be somebody that has a voice and plays rugby, that wants to do community organized projects and play rugby. You don't have to just be able to run the ball really fast or run somebody over, but rather, you know, a lot of what you do off the field is important as well. And so if you guys have any questions outside, I'm about to open it up for questions, but, you know, if there are any conversations or anything that, you know, you kind of want to be able to carry further, that's my email address. Feel free to just drop a line at any time and I'll make sure to get back with you. And so with that, I will stop sharing and then I will unmute I will come back to it here. There we go. And, you know, if you guys have any questions, you know, feel free to just drop them here and I'll be more than happy to help.
Hey, Derek, this is Sunny Myers with Raleigh Rugby and NCYRU Exco. And so thanks for being here, first of all. And secondly, I just wanted to ask your advice on how to approach conversations with mainly like parents in the youth space. And, you know, do we have do we go through the parents first, you know, for like setting precedents? And then, you know, following up directly with players, you know, and making sure that everybody is in a line is like a one voice thing. And then also like at what point, which I'm sure is not an easy answer, but like, do you know, our club has always been and will always be put our, you know, our foot down on supporting of trans players and supporting of Black Lives Matters. And we will always be a place. And we made that known before it was actually cool to be made it known. And so, but where do you put the, like, if that is not what you align with, then our club is not for you, you know? And so like, it's probably a hard question to ask, but love to hear your take on that.
No, it's a good one. And, you know, the way I can approach it is really thinking about, you know, my own school, for example. Like Buckley School is a private school. It's all boys. It's predominantly upper middle class to upper class students, and a lot of the parents lean typically conservative. And so, you know, even when we approached, you know, just having the discussion about redoing our history curriculum, there was already, you know, arms being raised in terms of making sure we're not being revisionist. And this is before the 1619 project. This was 2015, 2016, when I first started in my new position. And one of the things that we had to do was top down. And so understanding that, you know, our board, for example, needed to be on board with us changing our history curriculum. But then it trickled down to our administration and then down to our faculty, and understanding that if we could get that relationship going, that's where the parents are going to be able to appreciate the hierarchy, right? And so understanding that, you know, from the top down for NC, or for, you know, the rugby union itself down in North Carolina, if it reflects top down that, you know, this is the work that we're doing, these are the things that we're focused on, this is what we want to be able to do more of, then, you know, as a parent, you see that and see that, all right, they've made the commitment. You know, what does that mean for me? And so I think sometimes within that answers a lot of their questions. But sometimes you need to be a little bit more explicit with some parents that's saying, even if it is a joke or, the non-inclusive kind of messages that are being sent won't be tolerated. And so having that open conversation with them that, yes, you have First Amendment rights here, but at the same time, there's also going to be, a reaction to that. And, for Buckley, for example, that was something that we had to be faced with, that we had some parents that did not like the idea that we were changing our curriculum or adding an element where we're discussing race or gender or religion, because they felt like, these things are made to be divisive. And that was its own conversation. But the biggest thing was that the school had already made its decision. And so the school could then say either get with it or get lost. And, you have to understand that there are going to be some parents that will get lost, and it is what it is, and working from there. Good question, though.
And would you think that it would be helpful that it come from a union level as far as like expectations, and so that the clubs can help it drive it down? Do you think that's worth it to put in the work and framework from a union level from that perspective? Because we don't, technically have ties to direct teams, and so maybe that would be maybe more beneficial.
Yeah, and I think, and I would say yes, because I do see like the more streamlining that you can do with, especially as it comes to, budding conversations around race, so that like you don't have, one team doing it this way and another team doing it this way, but rather you just have, your overall message being sent. But then also it's feeding down into the other teams, is saying like, this is something where the union itself is telling you to go in that direction. And we want you to go in that direction. We're encouraging you to do that. And so that way they can also be seen as a helpful resource. So, those clubs don't have to feel like, they're kind of left out on their own. If they decide to come out with a statement, but rather in the spirit of, what USA Rugby's put out or what North Carolina has put out, we as a team, as a club, are also going to put something out too, just to kind of make sure that parents understand that like from top down, we are already committed to being able to do a great deal of this work. And I see here from Joseph, can I speak on cultivating allies or harnessing allies? And so what can you do when you're the only brown face? That's very real, especially just given that, it's, you almost end up kind of harnessing the weight of like being the token a lot of times when you're by yourself and having to feel like you're doing this on your own. I do think that, Joseph, it'll help tremendously to kind of touch base with other coaches outside of that union. So for example, if you reached out to coaches out west, or out just whoever you have your relationships with first, so people that you can already trust to have this conversation, and you can actually scaffold it and have those conversations with those friends that you've already made, and kind of use that as a bridge as to like, oh, all right, let me touch base with this club. There's somebody that I kind of see being close to wanting to do this work. They just might need a little bit more oomph. And being able to kind of recognize that, if you kind of lend a hand out there, you'd be surprised how quickly others are kind of looking for it too. And so that way it doesn't feel as if you by yourself have to do this, in which you shouldn't, but rather you want to be able to make this everyone's work. So it doesn't feel like, you've got to don on the cape every day that you walk outside.
Derek, I have a question. This is Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like what you said about getting rid of the shut up and play mentality. And I liked what you said about going back to your values and mission statement with things. So my question really is, when you're looking at things online and something sort of walking that line of being racist, like for us as a union, where, like, do I just say this doesn't meet the values of our union? Like, at what point am I crossing over into the territory of silencing somebody's free speech?
Well, I think it's a great question because it is one that kind of it's got nuance to it, right? Where, it doesn't necessarily harm another person, but it can, right? And so making sure that, you know, if you already have your values kind of set, and I saw that you guys already have your bylaws, for example, already really written up, and it's very clear that, if you've got players or, parents even, because that can happen too, where you have parents that are, their Facebook feeds are just a complete battleground, but a lot of it is disparaging remarks on Black and brown families. That can be, a quick email about just making sure, like, hey, like, I just noticed, like, this post, for example, doesn't really reflect, what we encapsulate here as a unit, through some of our teams. And, again, I think about Buckley, for example, and where we've had faculty, we've had administrators in the past actually land themselves in hot water just because their Facebook persona really wasn't reflecting what we at Buckley truly believed to be as something that was positive. And so it didn't have to be a huge conversation. It was just hey, we notice. And if we notice, then that means other players can see that too. And so, if you want to be able to advocate on your players' behalf and making sure that it's a safe environment for your players, that's where you do have that authority to be able to say, like, hey, for the safety of our own players, this is something that's important to kind of recognize, and not feeling like you're speaking out of turn when you say that, but rather I want to be able to make sure that all of my players, regardless of who they are, get a chance to come into this space and not feel like, they're automatically being seen as kind of an outlier or an outsider, and making sure that we can kind of go about it in that direction.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And again, as 9 o'clock rolls around here, I think it's important that we all understand that there's no perfect way to do this. There's no tried and true method that's going to get you, the best results, but just kind of understanding that this is something there. If you have people that you trust and can talk about this with ahead of time, it will already help you out when you kind of get back into the space too.
One really quick question. So it's Kiwi. Blindside flanker or open side flanker?
Open side for me.
Yeah, that's okay. That's fine. Because blindside is not good enough.
We've
That's
got
a really
one
important
question.
question.
We do have a real question from Andy Thomas, though. He wants to know
I
your
see.
thoughts. Okay.
Thoughts on parent, coaches, players, contracts, in addition to mission statements. I mixed results. I found out sometimes it is great to kind of be on the same page. Like, hey, I just drew this up. It's just a quick contract that we're going to all adhere to these things and be able to hold each other accountable. But to some it works great, because then that is something where you can just kind of go back to it when you feel like there's a conversation being had that isn't positive, or you want to be able to make sure that everybody's still grounded in, the main mission here. But for some, they kind of see it as something that's binding, that's restricting their voice and their freedoms. And, it all depends, again, on, your own team's culture. If it's something that kind of can be woven into that, to the fabric of your team, I say definitely go for it. If it's something that's going to feel like it might be forced, again, it's great to be able to have that conversation first with the full team, and see how they feel about it. Or, even if, I would say it's always important to talk to the players first in this situation rather than parents. I do think that, at its core, parents want to be able to protect their kids. And I definitely think about that a lot as, we have players that are coming out now to play, and, the parents are paying close attention to what's being said, or what's not being said. And so understanding that, for them, while the parents feel what they feel, it's really going to impact the players first. And so making sure that if anything, we're going to touch base with the players first, because their voice is really ultimately what we want to be able to uphold more so. Us as coaches can be able to, again, to guide them in a nonpartisan way, but understanding to the parents, we want to be able to equip your kid with the ability to think for themselves. They don't want to, come to me for all of their thoughts and feelings, or to you as a parent for all their thoughts and feelings, but rather they themselves need to be able to know how to kind of navigate these situations too. And so it can be something where, again, transparency is always beautiful. You can get a chance to touch base with the players and then just shoot an email out to the parents like, hey, this is a conversation we had today and this is why we had it. And so making sure that, the objective is very clear that this is something that we want to be able to do. And it, again, will cultivate that culture in which you might have some parents that will talk to you a little bit more about what it's like at home. And again, that's part of your ever expanding role as coaches. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Derek. I really appreciate it. And
No, thank you.
thanks to everybody from the union who's on tonight. We appreciate you joining, and hopefully we can sort of carry these conversations forward.
Yep. And I'm always here if you guys need me. So feel free to shoot an email if you have questions along the way, for example, about your respective clubs or administrations. I'd be happy to hear what's going on there too.
Thank you very much. It's a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Have a good evening.
All right. You too.